child that you are still needing to use full dose every day, 3 or 4 days down the line, or is becoming more unwell, then they do need to be checked out.
His temperature went up quite quickly. I actually rang 111 to speak to them about it, and one of the questions they asked was, had he had a bump to the head? And just suddenly realised a couple of days before he had, so that kind of really frightened me.
Hello and welcome. This is a very special and hugely important new series on Channel Mum. There are no other video-based first aid courses out there for parents quite like this one. So together with St John Ambulance, we're covering the topics all parents want to know about. I'm joined by TV's Dr. Dawn Harper and mums Kate and Lily. We know how important it is as a parent to feel confident and reassured that we would know what to do in a medical emergency involving our little ones. We really hope that by watching our videos that you go away better informed and more prepared for any emergencies that hopefully will never happen. This week we're going to be discussing fevers. We know it's something that every mum and dad worries about. It's a bit of a minefield, isn't it, knowing, when you should go to A&E or anything like that. I know personally, my child, he was about 8 months old, I think, and he went from being a little bit under the weather to his temperature spiking so quickly. He was burning hot and he was vomiting in the house, and not just a little, it was continual vomiting. We rushed him to A&E, and they're amazing with small babies, aren't they? They got him through, gave him ibuprofen. And they said, we are a little bit worried. His heart rate is higher than it should be. So they got him straight through to paediatrics, and I was worrying myself silly. And then we had to go through the whole process of trying to get a wee sample, which didn't happen because trying to catch a wee sample from a baby is not easy. And then after a few hours, they said, we think it's just a virus, go home and monitor this, that and the other. But they all said you were absolutely right to come in, because at that point, it all seemed really extreme.
Yeah. Okay, so you've mentioned a few things there which are very relevant. First of all, his heart was racing. A fever will put a heart rate up. He was sick. Children with a fever will often be sick. Not necessarily from the underlying problem, but just the fever itself can do it. And actually catching a wee sample is difficult, but also if your temperature goes up just 1 degree, you will lose, as an adult, you'll lose something like half a litre of fluid in a 24-hour period in sweat. So that'll be proportionately less in a small child, but they lose fluid and they very rapidly become dehydrated. So not only is it more difficult to catch a urine sample, but sometimes you'll find that a baby will have a dry nappy because they're getting a bit dehydrated. And a child that's had a dry nappy for 12 hours should always be seen by a doctor, just to be checked out. Fever, you're so right. Every single child is going to have a fever at some point. When does it really matter, and how do you know when they've got a fever? Well, they are going to feel hot. Most households, I think, have got thermometers at home, and I've got a few here. This is a forehead strip. Not my favourite, I'll be honest with you, because these will give you an indication, just as feeling your child will give you an indication, but they tend to reflect the temperature of the skin rather than the temperature of the body, and it's the internal temperature that we're worrying about.
That's interesting. So, as a child, they were always in my mum and dad's medicine
cabinet.
Well,
and I think, because actually even an ill, fractious child, you can actually persuade them that's quite a cute, fun thing to do, to perhaps put the sticker on their forehead and so on. So they're easy to use, and they are an indicator. They're just not as accurate as perhaps we'd like them to be. These are perhaps the next step up, and we tend to use these underneath an armpit, and they're pretty accurate actually. What we use in clinic, what I use in surgery, is a digital ear thermometer, and we have these little caps. That's basically a hygiene thing because you're going to use it from one patient to another, but you clip that on and that'll give you a digital readout. I guess that's the gold standard. It's not in everybody's budget. But actually, although we talk through numbers, so we would say that a child up to about 6 months, any temperature over 38, you really ought to be getting checked out, and an older child, a temperature over 39. But I don't get too hung up on numbers. If your child is feeling very hot, and they've got a bit of a cough or a cold or whatever, that you know they've got a fever, then you need to bring that temperature down. Never ever give a young child anything containing aspirin. So if you're looking at any brand names and so on, always look at the ingredients. They shouldn't have aspirin in if you're giving that to a small child, because of a very rare but quite serious complication that you can get by giving aspirin to small kids. Sometimes you hear people talking about putting their children in cold water to reduce the temperature. I always say tepid. You want to bring the temperature down, but with tepid water, tepid sponging, and removing excess layers. And for most kids, it's just going to be a temperature, and you'll manage it quite effectively. Occasionally, like Noah, they've got a very high temperature and they're unwell, they do need to be checked out. But thankfully, at the end of the day, it was discovered that that was just a virus. And most of these things will be a viral infection that don't need anything more than just a bit of managing at home.
Lots of fluids as well?
Always fluids. Drink plenty, little and often. A child that's feeling very unwell, particularly if they're vomiting, you don't want to give them large volumes at one go because it's all going to come straight back at you. The important thing is to make sure that you offer little and often and you try and keep them well hydrated. I often, this is difficult because I see kids all the time, so it's quite easy for me to assess hydration, and I don't want to make life too complicated. But there are a couple of simple things you can do in small babies where they've got the soft spot at the top of the skull.
Oh, I was always so paranoid about that.
You can feel that. It gets quite sunken if they're getting dehydrated. If you just gently pinch their skin, if you pinch a baby's skin, it sort of retracts straight away really quickly. If it tenses up like an older person's skin, that's a sign that they're very dehydrated.
Really? That's good to know.
And in an older child, the child that's thirsty, we often say, by the time you're thirsty, you're already at least 5% dehydrated. By the time you've lost enough fluid for the mechanisms to say to your brain, I need a drink. So the child that's thirsty is already getting dehydrated. So little and often, and keep offering it.
Kate and Lily, have you had experiences of temperatures? I'm sure you have.
Yeah, but nothing that I've had to go into A&E and stuff. Just like you said, took a layer off, kept them cool, offered my breast frequently, but nothing dramatic.
We've had a few experience of it, very similar to yours actually, Charlie, where his temperature went up quite quickly. I actually rang 111 to speak to them about it, and one of the questions they asked was had he had a bump to the head, and just suddenly realised a couple of days before he had, so that kind of really frightened me. And they, because of that reason, I think, and a few others, they did tell us to take him into A&E, and luckily it was nothing to do with that. It was again a virus, and we were sent home and told to manage it at home. But it was quite a scary thing.
I suspect the reference, when they were asking you questions, they were probably asking if he was a little bit out of sorts and not himself.
Yeah, they ask a lot of different questions.
And that would be more why they were worried about the head rather than, so a bump to the head shouldn't cause a fever.
Okay.
But a serious bump to the head could cause a child to be not quite themselves, and they're worrying whether that's a significant head injury rather than it being linked to the fever.
Okay.
I guess a high fever could be a sign that something else is going on.
Absolutely.
And that's why you need to be vigilant. Okay. And these are, in your professional opinion, the best sort to have if you can have one in the home?
That's what I use in surgery, and they are very reliable.
I guess once you've invested the money, it's kind of in your medicine kit at home for quite a long time. So
hopefully for a very long time, not being used very often.
Yeah, so they're worth the outlay if you can do that.
If you can afford it.
Yeah, definitely.
So I've heard you can give paracetamol and ibuprofen at the same time. Is that right?
Well, you shouldn't need to, and actually there is a much better argument for what I call alternating the doses, and what that means is that you can give paracetamol 4 times in a 24-hour period, whereas you would give ibuprofen 3 times. And if you alternate those doses, what that gives you is a greater spread of symptom control.
So every 4 hours do a different.
You've got it. You can keep the temperature down by, for example, first thing in the morning you might give a dose of paracetamol, and then maybe later on you'd give a dose of ibuprofen, and then maybe at lunchtime there'd be another paracetamol, and that way you can control the fever more appropriately and for a longer period of time.
Right, okay.
Well, the important thing is always check the label and make sure that you are giving the correct dose for your child's age as well, because dosing schedules change as our kids grow up, obviously they do, so make sure that you're giving the appropriate dose and never exceed that dose. If you're getting to the stage where you think you need to, if your child's symptoms are not controlled on maximum dose, it's at that point that really you should be talking to a doctor.
Okay. Is there an amount of time? So it's, say you're typically, my child's only ever had a temperature for about 24 hours. So, but what if you're kind of looking, it's been a few days and the temperature's still going? Is that a time you need to be seeking help?
So that would happen there'll be a trend. So if your child still has a fever 2 or 3 days down the line, but they are gradually getting better and you're perhaps needing to use a little bit less, then that's not the child that I would be worried about. The child that you are still needing to use full dose every day, 3 or 4 days down the line, or is becoming more unwell, then they do need to be checked out. So it's a kind of trend. It's not taking a temperature at an isolated point in time. It's looking at that whole kind of picture and trend, and I would expect a kid to be getting better after a few days from a common cold. If they're getting worse, they need checking out.
Right, so we've learnt about the signs to look out for, how to treat a fever, the best thermometers to use. I think we've learnt so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Dawn. That was really, really helpful. Who else looks after your little ones, though, that should watch this now? A grandparent, a partner? What about friends with little ones? Please share this video now to save a life. A massive thank you to St John Ambulance for helping us create these videos, and of course to Dr. Dawn and our lovely mums for being here today. Don't forget to check out the rest of the videos in this series. They're all on channelmum.com. We would love you to leave us a comment and join in with the conversation.